Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail, the realm where the shadows whisper ancient secrets and nightmares come to life. I am your guide through the darkness, and on this channel, we delve into the spine-chilling world of Wendigo horror stories that will send shivers down your spine. First story. Wendigo 1860. Tim points his gun and whispers, "I see it, but it doesn't see us." I snap, "Tim, we don't have the time nor the resources for this. Let's go before." That was when the it in question, a Wendigo, pointed its head straight up with a crack and began to sniff the air before twisting and writhing unnaturally with the sounds of a million bones snapping. I was drawn out of my awe when Tim's gun went off, and in an instant, the beast leaped towards us, only missing us, 'cause I pushed Tim behind a tree. Sometimes I get ahead of myself. I was a small-time bounty hunter, and Tim, he was a bartender and self-proclaimed master tracker. I'd take him along with me for jobs that I couldn't handle alone. The only problem being he was a bit of a hothead. Never seemed to be too much of an issue, till he tried taking pot shots at something darn near bulletproof. Anyhow, after I pushed him behind the tree, we got to scurrying, like a couple of raccoons that was just hit with a broom. We quickly got up the short hill, and I got to making a plan before it was on us again. Neither took long. Tim had ideas of his own, however, and began to shoot at it. The creature was on him instantly, and it pulled back its arm when I shot it, getting its attention. It turned and looked at me while I had it distracted. Tim wriggled the muddy 16-bore shotgun off his back and blasted the creature in the face. It stumbled back off of him, stunned. At that moment, I grabbed my rifle and shot it again. It leaped for me and I dove behind a fallen tree. The creature landed on hard on a large portion of a tree, getting impaled. Now, the way I got this odd job wasn't exactly normal. One day, while pursuing a shop, an old man approached me. He said he'd give me $500 to kill the creature that lives in the woods on his property. So of course I took the job. I figured it was just some crazy guy in the woods, or a coyote, or some wolves or something. I took Tim just in case I had any trouble. After the thing impaled itself on the tree, it writhed and screeched. Tim got to his feet and shot it again, sending an antler and some bone chunks flying. It wasn't dead. As it started to pull itself from the tree, me and Tim bolted. It was just then that I remembered that the old man had given me a stick of dynamite. I turned, lit it, and tossed it into the tree next to where the creature was implied. Just as it pulled itself from the jagged stump, the large oak fell, trapping the creature. We ran, and we didn't look back. When I returned to the old man's shack, there was a note with $500. The note said, "Thank you for freeing me of this burden." I never saw the old man again. Second story. My best friend and her twin brother hunt cryptids for food. We're trying to make a plan. We were on our expedition to find passages to the underground in the woods when the nightmare happened. Harley and I had been walking ahead, with Scout and Van tagging behind. I tried to keep an eye out for the two, but talking to Harley had proven rather interesting. I'd heard a little about him from Scout, but she and I had plenty of time to kill at work between customers, while he and I had barely ever met. Also, I felt like if I didn't keep him mentally occupied, he'd just flip out and possibly try to kill all of us. Ever since Van showed up at their place, Harley had been ready to erupt. Scout and Harley both have a little bit of a temper, but he's definitely got a low simmer. She doesn't. "I don't trust this guy," he just muttered at me for what had to be the 15th time, and I nodded. I was pretty sure my reasons for distrusting Van were totally different than Harley's, but that didn't mean I disagreed at all. I was about to say something when suddenly I heard Van shout. Harley and I spun around to find someone standing between the four of us. or something rather. It was tall and almost entirely naked, wearing only what looked like a torn apron. There wasn't a single hair on its body, and when it turned to face us, my stomach must have dropped. It had no eyes, no nose, just an enormous mouth stretched into an unnaturally wide grin, bearing rows upon rows of needle-like teeth. It looked like a reject from a Guillermo del Toro movie, one he cut out for being too nightmarish. No doubt about it. This had to be Smiley. I'll never forget the look on Scout's face, a mix of naked calculation, recognition, and fear. The creature was standing between us, its posture lowered and menacing like a predator about to attack. It seemed to be trying to decide on which pair of us to lunge at first. Scout was faster, though. "Run," she mouthed, giving an almost unnoticeable nod into the opposite direction before grabbing hold of Van's sleeve and dashing off with him. Before I knew it, Harley hurled the box of nails into Smiley's face, took me by the arm, and dragged me along as he ran off. The thing let out an enraged shriek as dozens of tiny pieces of iron hit its body. I didn't dare to look behind us as I stumbled after Harley as fast as I could, but I was hoping a couple might have actually caught it point first and stuck. Harley was almost impossible to keep up with. He led me through the woods in roundabout ways, his firm grip on my wrist never loosening. Where are we going? It was hard to even get it out. I think of myself as being reasonably fit, but I was way outmatched, and it was all I could do to gasp it between breaths. Harley didn't answer. He seemed so focused on the way ahead of us, I don't think he heard me at all. When the white facade of his and Scout's large house came back into sight, I realized we had merely taken a detour to confuse the wild one. To my great relief, I saw Scout's bright hair emerge from the dark thicket like a torch. I don't know why I thought it, and certainly not then, but the twins have beautiful hair, Harley too. You'd think his head would shine in the darkness like a flame. We met Van and Scout halfway. Van was gasping for air, his broad chest heaving and falling. Scout seemed hardly fazed at all. "We have to lock up the house. Harley, get in the back and get the cars started," she ordered, reaching into her pocket to toss him her car keys. He caught them midair, let go of my hand, and rushed around the corner of the house. I couldn't even put one foot in front of the other, to be honest. I just stood there, trying hard to catch my breath while Scout ran up to the back door and began to fumble around with the lock. I began to stagger toward the building's front, trying to wave at Van to come with me, but he shook his head. Instead, he stared at the tree-line, occasionally glancing over at Scout. It was like he was on guard or something. Finally, she hopped down from the porch and started toward the cars. The twins' house isn't just close to the woods, it's almost part of them itself. Small trees and bushes marching along the sides of the house and down the driveway, and in hindsight, we really should have known what would happen. I'd thought we'd left Smiley in the forest, but no, and when it jumped out in front of me, I almost screamed. Scout yelped as she stumbled backward and pressed her back up against me, seemingly in an attempt to shield me. My mind raced. I reached for the athame, but I didn't dare get close enough to use it. The back door was locked. We wouldn't be able to make it inside in time. With the way Smiley was heading for us, almost stalking us, seemed to be enjoying our anguish. And then, suddenly, Van stepped out right in front of it. I don't know if I can describe what happened exactly, but he suddenly seemed bigger. He was still breathing heavily, but there was a kind of clicking, hissing noise mixed in with his breath. It sounded like nothing I'd ever heard from a human being before, more like an insect or a dangerous piece of machinery. I glanced at his hands. They were hooked into gauntlet claws, so stiff it looked almost painful. Even Smiley appeared to be taken aback. It took a few steps toward him, only for his labored breathing to grow louder and more menacing. I was terrified, and not just of Smiley either. Scout continued to slowly push me back, trying to distance the two of us from it, but we didn't go unnoticed. The faceless, grinning thing lunged toward us, only for Van to throw himself against it. He hissed loudly and shoved it to the ground. "Holy beep," Scout whispered. She stumbled backward and landed on her butt, pulling me down with her. I stared at the pair battling on the ground. Getting out of there was the last thing on my mind. I could barely breathe, much less stand and run. Instead, we watched as Van pinned the wild one to the ground. It still seemed too stunned to fight back. Its ever-grinning face turned up at the black-haired man in disbelief. Van looked up only once during the whole thing. I could only see his face for a second, but a second was all it took. Something was very wrong with his face. His mouth was hanging open, and for a second I thought I saw two thin, curved fangs protruding from it. After a few seconds, Smiley seemed to regain its composure. It pushed Van off and dragged its sharp fingernails across his chest, prompting a very human-sounding scream. Still, that seemed to be enough for it to abort its mission. It rushed off to the tree-line in large leaps, leaving the three of us by ourselves. Van pushed himself back to his feet. His fangs had vanished, but he was still hissing under his breath. There was something else, though, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. So when he began to stagger toward Scout, who was cowering on the ground next to me, I staggered to my feet. I pulled my athame and stood between them. "Don't come any closer," I called, hoping he wouldn't hear my voice shaking. "You stay right where you are." He ignored me. "Hey, I just wanted to see if you guys are." And then I tried to stab him. I'm a small guy. I always have been. I was that kid in school who stood at the front of every concert and class photo because I was a head shorter than everyone else. Van, on the other hand, was tall even before whatever weird transformation he'd undergone, and he grabbed my knife hand and pulled me onto my toes like the world's most unprepared ballet dancer with pretty much no effort at all. He squeezed my wrist like he was trying to get me to drop the athame. I just squeezed it harder, and he stared at me the way he did back in my apartment, like he was sure he'd seen me somewhere before. Face to face, I could see what had been bothering me before. His eyes were bigger, just like the rest of him, and the pupils weren't normal pupils anymore. They were split into 4, resulting in 8 little dots like spiders' eyes, little black clusters where normal irises should have been. I tried to hit him to get away, which probably wasn't the smartest thing I could have done under any circumstances, but I wasn't expecting him to be so fast when he grabbed my other arm and lifted me straight off the ground. "Let's get something straight," he said, and his voice was that kind of soft where you wish the person was yelling because it'd be less frightening. "I have no interest in hurting you, or Scout, or Harley, or anyone, really. But if you make me defend myself, I won't be responsible for what happens to you. Do we understand each other?" I didn't answer him. I opened my mouth, but nothing really came out. Instead, I felt tears rolling down my face. It's not my prettiest character trait, but it's a pretty consistent one. He let me back down onto my feet, and someone grabbed my elbow from behind. I gasped and turned and almost hit Harley in the face by accident. He pulled me away from Van, And if looks could kill, he would have left Smiley a pretty decent meal. The hell is wrong with you? He didn't do anything to you. He literally tried to stab me. Yeah, well, you can't blame him for missing. I don't think he's had a whole lot of practice. Enough, Scout cut in. We can't just stand out here talking. We're too exposed. Come on. Van can ride with me, and Harley can ride with. No way. I'm not leaving you alone with him. We just found out he lied to us, Scout. I don't think that's the best. Let me see your knife. I stared at Van. Do I look stupid to you? Do you really want me to answer that question? He sighed and shook his head. Forget it. Just draw it, would you? I pulled the athame, keeping an eye on him the whole time. My wrist hurt where he'd squeezed it, and I swapped from my right hand to my left. Mine couldn't get much worse, but my grip could. Van reached for it, and I took a step backward. Chill. He reached for it again and put his hand on the blade. Everyone here gets to your place safe. At least as far as I have control over the situation, they do. You have my word on iron. I thought you said iron didn't matter to you. I said it doesn't harm me. That's true. But it matters to you. And I think that knife specifically matters to you, too. He took his hand away. Scout's right. We're way too exposed out here. But I'll explain when we're inside, and I promise I'll explain everything. As much as I can, anyway. There are things even I don't know. But I'll try. I just nodded at him. He swung into Scout's car, and I slipped into Harley's passenger seat and curled up against the window. His radio was on some alt-rock station, and I bit my lip and stared at it until finally I couldn't take it anymore and reached out to click it off. Harley gave me a weird look. I opened my mouth to apologize and say something, anything, but he shook his head and waited for Scout and Van to pull out ahead of us before reaching out and giving my good hand a squeeze. Van was good to his word, at least as far as all of us getting to my place in one piece. I unlocked the door and tapped the mirror to its left as I stepped in, then took a look around before opening the door to everyone else. I think we're good. I went to the kitchen to get drinks while everybody else got settled. I wanted a minute to clear my mind, but when I reached for a glass, it slid through my fingers and shattered on the counter, and I almost started bawling. Step back. You're going to cut yourself. It was Van's voice, but I stepped back anyway. He was probably right. I covered my eyes and heard the soft tinkle of glass being swept up and thrown away before he took my elbow. Look, I wanted to talk to you before we all sit down. It doesn't take a genius to look around here and see you've had some bad experiences with this kind of thing before. I don't know what they were. It's not really my business, and I doubt you'd tell me even if it was. But I want you to know, directly from me to you, whoever messed you over before probably hates me, too. I'm not some kind of double agent. If you're in this for Scout, we're on the same side. I won't ask you to trust me, but please believe me when I say I lied for my own protection, nothing else. I nodded. He pulled another glass out of the cabinet and handed it to me before walking back into the living room. I filled some glasses and walked them out. So now what? Scout was on one end of the sofa, Harley on the other. Van took the same chair he'd been in before. I thought about sitting on the coffee table and decided to take a patch of floor next to Harley's leg instead. Van drained half his glass at one go, and I winced. Someday, stuff like that isn't going to bother me anymore. Today wasn't that day. If he noticed, he didn't say, just leaned back in the chair. Not to put too fine a point on it, we could be screwed, he said. It's here. It knows we're looking for it. It knows we know it's here. Between us, we have very few weapons, and your boyfriend has an extremely bad case of fight or freeze, and it leans to the freeze end. Boyfriend? Scout said it, but both the twins made the same face at the same time. Or almost the same face. They're not really identical, if you know how to look. Van gestured at me. Maybe it was just residual adrenaline from the fight with Smiley. Or maybe it's really actually that funny. I don't know. Anyway, I started laughing so hard I choked. Harley grabbed my shoulders and pulled me against his leg before I could fall over. Scout was laughing, too, and even Harley was chuckling a little, but I didn't stop until there were literal tears in my eyes. Van just raised his eyebrows at us. I stand corrected. I wanted to say something coherent, but instead I just started howling laughter again. I wiped my eyes. Listen, I told him, fighting down giggles before they could turn into hysterics. Scout is great, but she'd have to have one hell of a surprise in those jeans, and I'm pretty sure she doesn't. Van just made this kind of face at me, and I gave up on tamping down the laughter. I turned to look up at Harley and slammed my head against his knee, still laughing so hard I barely noticed. It's the beard, isn't it? He thinks I'm straight because of the beard. I'm shaving as soon as this is all over. I didn't like it anyway. Maybe I'll get a lip ring and see if that helps. Van still looked like he didn't totally get it, but he shook his head anyway. Doesn't change the problem, though. What we really need is an ally. Someone who actually knows something about the underground. He sighed and rubbed at his face. I know you're going to wonder, after this morning, why that can't be me. The answer is nobody really knows what I am. Human Wild One hybrids are rare, and most of them get left as changelings. I might be the only hybrid in existence who was actually raised by my birth family. There are a lot of wild ones down there who are at total odds with me even being allowed to exist, and if I knew how to control my own transformation, I could probably hold off one or two at a time, but I don't. I'm too human to be one of them, and too much one of them to fully fit in as a human. Whether that makes me a mistake or a miracle is still up for grabs. What it doesn't make me is an asset. He sighed. If my dad was here, he'd know people. But he isn't. I saw Scout duck her head. Harley did the same, but less in grief and more in thought. Then he glanced up at her. Hey, what about your queen, mistress, whoever lady? The one you said rescued you when you set off your own trap? Scout met his eyes. The mistress of the woods? That's the one. Think she'd help us? Scout shrugged. Worth a shot, I guess, but I have no idea how to find her. Offerings. I leaned forward to see around Harley's knee. Could say you have gifts for her? Yeah, but offerings like what? Harley asked. I opened my mouth, shut it, and then he raised his eyebrows at me. I have a couple of bags of Reese's Pieces in my car. Harley snorted. I was going to ask if he had any better ideas, and then my mouth dropped open and I went scrambling to the kitchen. I got back and dropped a bottle on the sofa. Here. Harley picked it up. Sweet red? Solo drinking doesn't really seem to be your style. I got it for Cherry's Jubilee because brandy tastes like ass, but I can always get more. He gave me a puzzled look. The hell is a cherry jubilee? It's cherries and sugar mashed together, and then you pour alcohol on it and light it on fire and serve it over ice cream. I flopped down between him and Scout. You might be able to eat it, actually. Hey, when all this is over, I should make some. We can celebrate. We're getting off track, Van said. So what's the plan? We take the wine to the woods and just call for her, and then ask, what? Your Royal Majesty, we'd like your help killing one of your subjects, Harley said. Maybe two, depending. Scout gave him a dirty look, but ignored him otherwise. Or at least stopping it, yeah. We're not trying to be malicious. We're just trying to live. She pushed herself to her feet. If we go now, we'll still have a few hours of daylight. I stood up. At least, I think I did. The next thing I remember is actually laying on the sofa with Harley staring intently at me. He's awake. You okay? I shook my head and the corners of my vision turned gray. No, I felt my stomach cramp. Oh, damn. I should probably eat something. Scout looked dismayed. She said, I'm so sorry, I forgot. It's okay. I've got some grapes, if you guys want anything, and I think some raspberries. I'm just going to get a sandwich. I glanced over at Van. Hungry? I'll pass, but you might want to take a couple extras for yourself. I nodded and headed for the kitchen, throwing whatever fruit I had into a bowl for the twins, while I waited for my leftover chicken to heat up. I tossed it between some bread and called it good. Not exactly gourmet, but filling, and I went back to the living room with the fruit and my sandwich. We ate our fill. At some point, Van went to the kitchen and came back with the last chicken drumstick between his teeth, and when we were done, Scout took the bowl and my plate to the kitchen to put in the sink. I took a deep breath. Okay, I said, and hoped this wasn't as terrible an idea as it felt like. Let's go. Third story. I am a psychologist. My patient has Wendigo psychosis. John had been my patient for months. I couldn't label him using official DSM codes, but he appeared to have what is known as Wendigo psychosis. At the time of my initial assessment, there wasn't any direct evidence that he tasted human flesh, although I could tell it was a significant preoccupation with him, and suspected him in the creation of several recent grisly scenes. Just admiring the artwork in your office, John said to me one day. He grinned, letting me see the teeth he filed down to fine points. So much red. I wonder if we're alike, you and I. I swallowed nervously. I couldn't report his Wendigo psychosis to the authorities, though, because I would be perceived to be just as crazy as him. I couldn't even say he's a cannibal, even though he's come out and said his greatest fantasy is to devour a person over the course of 3 days. There was no proof. So much red, John repeated, like a sea of blood making its way to your kitchen table. He grinned again, seeming even more unstable. This has to stop, John. Right now, there's no direct evidence linking you to the murders, but if you keep eating people, your actions will eventually catch up to you. You haven't reported me yet. No evidence. No, I think it's because you like me. Deep down, you like me, David Morrison. Why? Why the hell would I like someone like you? I can't prove it, but I know you are a murderer. Not just that, a monster. John put a hand admiringly to his heart. You really think that about me? Yes, I do. I'd like to talk about your parents, John. My session with him ended a few minutes later, and I drove to the park, taking in the beauty of summer before heading home. My wife had gone on a business trip, so I had the place to myself. I unlocked the front door and stepped inside. I popped on the TV. Hannibal was on, but I stopped myself from changing the channel. For some reason, I had become intrigued by monsters. For some reason, I shook my head. The reason was clear. John. I put dinner in the oven, a chicken stuffed with carrots and onions. While that cooked, I decided to go into the basement, do some late spring cleaning. Turning on the light, I surveyed the pile of unruly boxes. A few cocoons struggled as they hung from the ceiling. Their inner cores were human, weak from neuroses or traumatic life events to the extent that they were willing to visit a lonely psychologist's house for free therapy. "You're happier this way," I said. "And you called me a monster," John replied for the cocoon of silk. I turned around, greeting John's sharp teeth and blood-red eyes. He looked like a droopy-eyed hunting dog. "Did you come to eat me, John?" John hesitated, then shook his head. "No, I'm here to learn from you. From the master. You've obviously found a perfect way to ensnare your victims. Teach me." So I showed John how I spun a spider's web from my own hands. I was afraid he would eat me at first, and even though he stared at me with those hungry, blood-red eyes, he left with a cocoon of silk over his left shoulder. The Wendigo told me later that he could give me the hunger, the fire in my gut which would illuminate the path of my soul. I asked who had sent him. He told me John did, because he was so very grateful for the bundle of human flesh I gave him. "A gift for a gift," the Wendigo said, disappearing into the basement gloom and leaving me alone with my thoughts. Fourth story. There were 2 Wendigo outside my dad's house last night. So, last night my friends and I were driving around aimlessly and ended up on the side of town near my deceased father's house. I go there from time to time to sit on the steps, say hi, and that I miss him. And since every year for Valentine's Day since I was a kid my dad was my Valentine, I really wanted to stop by the house and give it a hug, but I don't think I'm going back. At around 11 p.m., we stop at the top of the road and I run down the exponential function of a driveway and run up to the garage and hug the house before quickly running up the stairs to the front porch. I rest my head on the front door, telling the house and my dad that I missed being there and that I missed him. I feel a hand on my shoulder, and I feel my entire body start shaking like I'm sobbing when only a few tears run down my face. Just as this overwhelming feeling starts to come over me and I feel lightheaded, my friend, Duke, calls me. "Alex, get back to the car. Right now. I'll explain why when you get here." Without hesitation, I sprint up the icy driveway without stopping. Thank God, without slipping and falling. When I get to the car, we take off doing 50 down the road. I'm still crying and can barely breathe, and my best friend Riley kept asking me if I'm okay and if I need anything. When I'm able to pull myself together, I ask what made them call me back to the car. Duke doesn't say anything for a few minutes and keeps driving while I keep pestering him about what he saw that made him call me. When we get to a stop sign, he grips the wheel tighter and says he saw a head poking out behind my dad's house, a little bit taller than the garage doors. After a minute of silence, I asked him what it looked like, a big-ass Wendigo. Duke said it popped its head out around the side of the house 2 times. And by the time I was sprinting down the stairs, Riley saw another head come out behind the neighbor's house. Initially, she had thought was a dog head, but soon realized the head was too massive to be a dog's. We take off down the road and all go and crash at my house after getting some McDonald's, with Duke checking the windows until we had fallen asleep. I think he may have spotted another one outside my house. My dog was flipping out all night and trying to get to all the doors in my house at once, and I didn't fall asleep until the sun came up. I don't know what happened. I don't know why my whole body was shaking and why I felt I was going to pass out, but I think my dad protected me, and I know I'm not going back to that house. Fifth story. I heard the last words of the woman in the woods. My hometown of Cedar Creek, Colorado had a woman who everyone loved to hate. Her name was Ms. Gatlin, and she was both my elementary school's janitor and the scapegoat for all unfortunate events around our town. The Cedar Creek elderly despised her for having a son out of wedlock, and the town parents scorned her for giving said son too much freedom, a parenting style which had supposedly led to his death at the hands of our town's eponymous river. As for the children of Cedar Creek, we didn't care at all about social conventions or parental negligence, but we all agreed that Ms. Gatlin was an ugly lady, and that was enough to warrant our cruelty. My best friend at the time was a curly-haired menace to society named Isaac who, by 5th grade, had established himself as a ringleader amongst the neighborhood boys. He did his best to inconvenience Miss Gatlin, though his pranks did little to rattle her. If we spread rumors about her poor hygiene just within her earshot, Miss Gatlin didn't bat an eye. If we released bugs inside her janitorial closet, she'd calmly sweep them outside. If we stuffed rotten food inside her locker, she'd clean it out quietly and without complaint. Our usual tricks never worked on Miss Gatlin, and all of us unimaginative kids were stumped by how to best a woman whose job was to clean up messes of all kinds. In my last year of primary school, Hanukkah fell a week and a half before we were dismissed for winter break. All of the Jewish children thoroughly enjoyed showing off their gifts to the rest of us, who had to wait an eternity for our presents. Thanks to Kim Possible, Spy Kids, and Totally Spies, every kid in Cedar Creek was obsessed with espionage, so Isaac's gift of a Spy-Tech kit for kids made him even more popular than usual. Most of the kit was cheap plastic junk, but there was a small spy radio that seemed very well manufactured. It consisted of an earpiece and a button-sized microphone that was supposedly capable of transmitting audio up to a radius of 5 miles. Isaac, myself, and the rest of our crew spent most of the week before winter break running around town and testing the capabilities of the device. The audio quality was surprisingly good, although the earpiece and microphone could only be separated for about 3 miles before the sounds became too distorted to understand. It was a novel concept for a few days, but after a while we grew bored of playing walkie-talkie. Isaac wanted to use it for its intended purpose, surveillance, and he had the perfect target in mind. On the last day before winter break, Isaac and I glued the button-sized device to the back of an old brooch we had found in his sister's jewelry box. We covered it up with a strip of velvet and then glued on the pin and catch, and by the time we were done, you couldn't tell anything was amiss. We put it in a small white box, which we put in my backpack for later. We determined that I should be the one to deliver it, given Isaac's reputation as a prankster. After school, I found Ms. Gatlin in the staff break room. She barely looked at me as I walked into the room. I noticed, along the far wall of the break room, a wall of cubbies, each one marked with the name of a staff member. All of them were filled with gifts and letters, presumably from parents or other employees at the school. All of them, that is, except one. "You can't be in here, kid," Miss Gatlin said to me in her gruff voice. "I know." I swung my backpack onto my stomach and fished around for the box. It had gotten a little banged up in my bag, but I figured she wouldn't really care. I procured it and held it out to her. "But I wanted to give you this before the break." She stopped packing up, turning fully toward me. For a long moment, she just stood there, staring suspiciously at the box. Setting her bag down, she took a few steps forward and grabbed the box out of my hand. She gave it a slight rattle and then opened it slowly. When she saw the brooch, she gingerly took it out of the box and turned it around in her hand. Then she paused again, looking between the glittering, fake emerald and me. "It's not new, sorry. It used to be my mom's." I told her, going off of the script Isaac and I had conceived to add more authenticity to the handoff. She doesn't wear it anymore, but I thought you might like it. Miss Gatlin kept staring at me, her expression unreadable. I half expected her to chuck it into the garbage bin in the corner of the room, but to my relief, she gave me a single nod. "Thank you," she said, and pinned the brooch onto her cardigan carefully, like it was a precious gem and not some cheap hunk of plastic. I gave her a smile that she did not return, and then she shooed me away. Isaac was waiting for me in the woods outside school. I flashed him a thumbs up, and he slapped my back twice in congratulations. He pulled the earpiece out of his backpack and held it between us. I put my ear next to the speaker and was delighted when I could hear movement. The sound was slightly more muffled now by the velvet backing, but the audio quality was still really good. We heard the sound of snow crunching under Miss Gatlin's feet as she walked herself through the woods home. We listened giddily for a few minutes, then raced back to my house to celebrate our success with hot chocolate. Since we had the attention span of two 10-year-old boys, we forgot about our triumph until just a few minutes before Isaac's mom came to pick him up. When I remembered, I pulled out the earpiece, which we had decided would live at my house since it was closer to Miss Gatlin's, and listened. More than last year, but not as much as the year before last. What do you think about it? Do you like it? Can you feel it? I see. Me personally, I've loved it since I was a little girl. It falls so prettily. What the heck is she saying? Isaac asked me, as if I had any clue. The better question, in my mind at least, was who the heck was she talking to? She had no kids or husband and didn't have any friends as far as I knew. I dunno, I said. She's talking about snow, I think. Though the question, "Can you feel it?" seemed an odd thing to ask anyone. We sat there listening to her talk for 5 minutes straight. I'd never heard Miss Gatlin talk that much in my life, even though I'd seen her most days since I was only 5 years old. Looking back, I'm not entirely sure what we had expected, but it certainly wasn't a monologue of that length. We strained our ears listening for another voice, but heard nothing. Maybe she's schizophrenic? Isaac volunteered. I had no idea what that was, but I trusted his authority. His mom showed up to take him home, and I turned the speaker off to walk him outside. After that, every once in a while, I would turn the speaker on and listen. It seemed that no matter the time, be it early in the morning or late at night, Miss Gatlin was always talking. She talked about all kinds of things, everything from clothing to stocks to the weather to politics. Sometimes she prayed, talking so quickly and quietly that I could only make out one out of every 5 or so words. She apologized often and spoke constantly of a promise. Sometimes, when I turned on the speaker, all I heard were sobs, and sometimes the conversations were so strange that I couldn't make heads or tails of them. A young woman smiled at me today at the grocery market. Isn't that just the sweetest thing? I felt like it's been so long since someone smiled at me like that. Yes, I know she was just doing her job. Probably doesn't even know my name, haha. Oh, how hard this has been. How lonesome. But I am so very close to the finish line. I won't break my promise now. A few days before we returned to school, Isaac and I made the trek over to her house in an attempt to figure out who she was speaking to. I had seen her house a few times before, and each time I was taken aback by how small it was. Isolated and weathered, her home stood at the edge of the southern woodlands on a large plot of land, off of a street with very little through traffic. I remember standing on the side of the road with Isaac, staring at the shack-like house, which must have only had room for a bedroom, a bathroom, and maybe a tiny kitchen. "There's no way anyone else lives there," Isaac said after a while of standing and staring. We were too far away to peer in through the windows, but we were also too afraid to venture any closer. "She's either a witch or she's just some sad, ugly old lady who went crazy from having no friends." Isaac got bored quickly, so we left not too long after that. After we had made our way part way down the street, something compelled me to turn around and give the house a final look. When I did, I saw the unmistakable shape of Miss Gatlin standing on the porch, staring in our direction. I turned away and grabbed a hold of Isaac's arm. "She's watching us," I whispered to him. His eyes grew wide. "Sit," he said. "Should we run?" "No, that'll look suspicious. Let's just keep walking." We walked until we were out of eyeshot, and then we ran all the way home. I'm not quite sure what spooked us so badly, but for some reason, even when I was back in the safety of my own home, I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes burrowing into my back. And soon they'll all be coming back. It's hard seeing them sometimes, knowing my Oliver was among them once. Sometimes I think I see him. At least it'll get easier soon, thanks to you. By the time we went back to school, my friends had grown bored of the spy gear. I volunteered to return Isaac's speaker, but he said it was practically useless now since we couldn't retrieve the microphone. Surprisingly, Miss Gatlin continued to wear the brooch every day. It was always pinned to her non-work clothes, so the only time she was unbugged, as Isaac put it, was when she was in her janitorial outfit at my school. Seeing her guard the brooch so carefully made me feel kinda bad. Was that the only gift she had gotten for Christmas? Was it the only gift she had gotten in the past decade? Maybe she wasn't a witch or crazy. Maybe she was just lonely and had learned to cope by talking to herself. Months passed. Isaac and company, finally coming to terms with the fact that they would never get the rise they were looking for out of Miss Gatlin, moved on to terrorizing a curmudgeonly old man who lived across from Cedar Creek Elementary and was always yelling at kids for one reason or another. I was happy for Miss Gatlin. One day, in March, I found her sitting on a bench at the edge of campus during lunch. I took a seat next to her, not expecting much. She took one look at me, then fixed her gaze back at the sad-looking sandwich in her hand. "What do you want?" she asked without looking at me. "Nothing. Just wanted to sit here." She picked at the sandwich. "We're not friends, kid." "I know. You don't have any friends?" "That's right," she nodded. "Maybe one day, though," I said, and to my surprise, she laughed. I didn't even realize she was capable of laughing. She looked at me properly for the first time in our brief conversation, and I noticed that she was smiling. It was an unpracticed smile, but a genuine one. "Yeah," she said. "Maybe one day." Miss Gatlin packed up and headed back to the school building after that. She left a bag of mini Oreos on the bench next to me. I think she did it on purpose. I grew accustomed to checking up on her every now and then, listening to her conversations with herself. Sometimes, it almost felt like she was talking to me. Looking back on it now, I realize what a little villain I was, and what an immense invasion of privacy I was committing. I wish that I could take it back now, especially considering what happened next. Friday, May 17th marked the 10-year anniversary of Oliver Gatlin's death. I kept an eye on Miss Gatlin throughout the day, but she didn't seem any more dejected than usual. Maybe things were finally looking up for her. In any case, although I hadn't checked in on her for a while, I decided that evening to see how she was doing. My parents were gone for the weekend, and I was only allowed to stay at home alone if I stayed inside the whole time, so I had nothing better to do. Not long after sunset, as I lounged on the floor of my bedroom, I turned on the earpiece. Miss Gatlin was talking to herself, as always, but there was something strange about her tone. She sounded more excited than ever. Almost there, almost there, almost there. She repeated those two words over and over, until, at exactly 11:44 p.m., she let out a sound that I only understood years later to be a cry of triumph. "It is done. It is done, Dark Angel. Thank you, thank you. 10 years of solitude, and it was worth every second. Now, Angel, bring him back to me." What was she on about now? Were those song lyrics or something? I strained my ears, listening for another person out of habit, but of course, there was only Ms. Gatlin's voice. After a moment, her cries of happiness faded, her voice taking on a confused tone. "What do you mean?" "No, that can't be true. I kept my promise. I followed every rule. I let no one in, kept no companions, made no friends. I kept my wish a secret, as you told me. My angel, I sat up slowly, the building terror in her voice putting me on edge even from miles away. And then, she asked a question that still haunts me to this day. "What do you mean I had an audience?" There was a moment of silence, and then the surefire sound of the velvet backing of the brooch being ripped away. I could hear her breath, sharper and clearer than ever before, as she repeated a single word. "No, no, 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 no." She withdrew from the microphone, her rapid breaths replaced by what sounded like her front door being thrown open with a bang. There was no more noise from the microphone. I remember standing up in my bedroom, not quite understanding what had just happened, and not quite knowing what to do next. Something told me that I should go downstairs and make sure that the doors were locked. So I told myself to man up and forced myself down the stairs to the dark first floor. I made my way around the whole house, checking the doors and windows. Once I was done, I just stood there. Somehow, I knew she was coming, and that there was nothing I could do to stop it. I thought I was hearing the wind, but as it grew louder, I realized I was hearing wailing. I heard it long before I saw her, that gut-wrenching cry, that sound that I had previously heard only pale imitations of in movies where a mother loses her child. Standing in the darkness of my living room, I watched her sprint from the tree-line towards my house. Her mouth was wide open, her eyes glazed over, and her body dressed in a white nightgown. She looked and sounded like something out of my worst night terrors. I dropped to the floor and crawled away from the window, taking cover behind a couch.
"Who?
She howled, her mournful voice rising and falling as she ascended the steps to my front porch and slammed her fist against the door.
Who?
I needed to get to the phone, but the house phone was right next to the widow, and I was petrified. She hit the door so hard I was afraid that the hinges would give way. "How could you do this to me?" I clamped a hand over my mouth. She couldn't possibly know for certain that I was in the house, could she? The origin of the wailing shifted as she rounded the wraparound porch, the heavy knocks of her fists against the door giving way to the thudding of her shoes on the wooden porch floor. I stuck my head around the couch and saw no one at the front window, but when I looked to the side window, I saw a face hovering inches from the glass. I screamed at the top of my lungs as her fist came into contact with the glass, shattering it. I was so horrified by the rain of blood-speckled glass that I almost missed the sight of a shotgun scabbard strapped to her torso. Certain I was about to die, I screamed at her to go away, to leave me alone, and she screamed right back at me, asking me questions that I didn't understand. Dogs had begun to bark at the commotion, and my next-door neighbor's porch light turned on. "Please just go away," I shrieked as I finally found my footing and raced to the phone. I grabbed it from its holder, starting to type 911 as I decided whether or not I should risk running to the neighbor's house. When I looked at the broken window, though, she was nowhere to be seen. The wailing had receded, growing fainter and fainter until I couldn't hear her at all. I stood there dumbly until the sound faded entirely, my hand shaking. She was gone. I was sure of it. Should I still call emergency services? After a moment, I heard another, fainter sound and recognized the statusy audio immediately as a transmission from Isaac's spy gear. I raced upstairs, still clutching the phone, and grabbed the speaker from the floor where I had dropped it. I pressed it against my ear, listening to the faint sound of a familiar voice. "I hope this was worth it, kid," it said, calmly and coldly. "I hope you and your friends can laugh about this." I heard a bang, and then I heard nothing at all. It took 2 weeks for the police to find her body. Her final resting place was deep in the woods, under a thick shroud of junipers not far from the banks of Cedar Creek. As her face was mutilated beyond recognition, her body was identified by the shotgun lying beside her. They say that, although she was covered in enough blood to entice every animal within a 3-mile radius, her corpse was untouched by the beasts. Even the insects seemed hesitant to feed and the fungi slow to grow upon her body, as though even the lowliest creatures feared contamination by the lonely woman in the woods. They did not find a brooch on her person,